I was pulling the Christmas turkey out of the oven when I heard the moving truck rumble up my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched my daughter-in-law Cassandra step out of her BMW, pointing dramatically at my guest bedroom window, while two burly men unloaded furniture I'd never seen before. My son Marcus stood beside her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, avoiding eye contact with my house entirely. That's when I knew my peaceful retirement was about to become a battlefield I never asked to join. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession. Cassandra's signature impatient knock. I wiped my hands on my apron, took a deep breath, and opened the door to find her standing there with a smile so bright it could power the neighborhood Christmas lights. Surprise, Minnie! Mom and Dad needed a place to stay for just a few months while their condo renovation finishes up. I knew you wouldn't mind since you have all this extra space just sitting empty. Behind her, Marcus finally looked up, his face a mixture of apology and defeat. Behind him, Cassandra's parents, Harold and Dolores, emerged from a taxi. Harold already scanning my property like he was calculating square footage. Dolores clutching a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. I stood in my doorway, turkey cooling forgotten on the counter, watching strangers march into my home carrying boxes labeled Harold's office and Dolores' craft room, as if they'd been planning this invasion for weeks. Because apparently they had been. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters for what comes next. My name is Minnie Rogers, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd earned the right to quiet mornings and decisions that were mine alone. I'm a retired elementary school teacher who spent 43 years shaping young minds in the same brick schoolhouse where I learned to read myself. After my husband Frank passed 5 years ago, I'd finally found my rhythm living alone in the 4-bedroom colonial we'd bought when Marcus was born 35 years ago. The house sits on 2 acres in Millbrook Township, Pennsylvania, with a garden that Frank and I tended together for decades, and a front porch where I drink my morning coffee and watch deer graze in the early light. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, paid off with decades of teacher salaries and careful saving. The mortgage died with Frank, and I'd planned to live out my days here in peace, maybe leave it to Marcus when my time came. I'd worked hard for this quiet life. Those 43 years of teaching weren't just about lesson plans and parent conferences. I'd spent my own money on classroom supplies, stayed late tutoring struggling students, and brought home stories of children who needed extra love. Frank and I had sacrificed family vacations to pay for Marcus's college, skipped restaurant dinners to build our modest savings account, and chosen generic groceries over name brands so we could sock away money for retirement. Now here I was, comfortable but not wealthy, with a routine I cherished. Monday mornings at the farmer's market, Tuesday afternoons at the library, where I volunteered reading to preschoolers, Wednesday evenings playing bridge with my friend Ethel next door. Thursdays I'd drive to the cemetery to bring Frank fresh flowers and tell him about my week. Fridays were for grocery shopping and meal prep. Weekends were mine to garden, read, or simply sit on the porch swing Frank built and watch the world turn without me having to manage any part of it. It was a simple life, but it was carefully constructed, like the classroom environments I'd spent decades perfecting. Every corner of my house had its purpose, every drawer organized exactly how I liked it. The guest bedroom held Frank's old recliner and my sewing machine. The extra bathroom stored my cleaning supplies and seasonal decorations. The basement recreation room housed my collection of puzzles and the exercise bike my doctor insisted I use 3 times a week. Marcus had grown up here, learned to ride his bike on this driveway, brought his high school girlfriends to awkward dinners at this same dining room table. He'd graduated from Penn State with a degree in business, landed a good job at a regional bank, and eventually married Cassandra in a wedding that cost more than Frank and I spent on our first car. I'd been proud of him, proud of the man he'd become, proud that he'd found someone who made him smile. But somewhere along the way, that pride had curdled into something more complicated. Cassandra Walsh had burst into our lives 6 years ago, like a small, perfectly groomed tornado. She was 28 to Marcus's 30, blonde in a way that required monthly maintenance, and possessed the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Her father Harold owned 3 furniture stores across eastern Pennsylvania. Her mother Dolores had never worked a day in her life, but somehow managed to stay busier than most CEOs. flitting between charity luncheons and country club committees. They were what Frank used to call comfortable people, the kind who'd never had to choose between fixing the car and fixing the roof, who planned vacations a year in advance and bought Christmas gifts in July when they went on sale. Not that there was anything wrong with comfort, but they wore their ease like armor, protective and impenetrable. From the beginning, Cassandra made it clear that she found my life quaint. She'd compliment my vintage kitchen appliances with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for museum exhibits. She'd marvel at how I made do with my small television, how I managed without a cleaning service, how I coped with doing my own grocery shopping instead of having them delivered. During their engagement, she'd suggested I might want to freshen up the house before the wedding photos were taken in my backyard. She brought paint swatches and fabric samples, talked about opening up the space and maximizing natural light. I'd smiled and nodded, then quietly returned the samples to their store the next day. The wedding itself had been a production that made my own simple ceremony 45 years earlier seem like a courthouse afterthought. 5 bridesmaids in dusty rows, a string quartet, and a reception that lasted until midnight. Harold had insisted on paying for everything, which I appreciated, but there was something about the way he handed over his credit card that felt like ownership rather than generosity. Marcus had been happy though, genuinely glowing as he danced with his new wife under lights that probably cost more than my monthly pension. And that happiness was enough for me. I'd raised him to choose love over convenience, even if I sometimes wondered if he'd chosen convenience disguised as love. For the first 2 years of their marriage, things had been pleasant enough. They'd visit every other Sunday for dinner, Cassandra bringing store-bought desserts that she'd arrange on my plates as if she'd baked them herself. She'd update me on their renovations, their vacation plans, their friends' pregnancies and promotions. Marcus would help me with small repairs around the house, and we'd fall into our old rhythm of comfortable conversation. But I'd started to notice small things. The way Marcus deferred to her in every decision, even about which movie to watch or where to go for dinner. The way she'd answer questions I'd asked him directly. The way she'd rearrange things when she thought I wasn't looking, moving my salt and pepper shakers to a better spot on the counter, adjusting my throw pillows to achieve better symmetry. It was like living with someone who was slowly, politely erasing me. Still, I'd told myself these were minor irritations, the normal adjustments that came with welcoming someone new into a family. Cassandra wasn't malicious, just particular. Marcus wasn't weak, just accommodating. They were building a life together, and I was grateful to be included in it, even peripherally. Then came the financial troubles, though I didn't learn about them until much later. It started with small requests. Could they borrow the car while Marcus's was in the shop? Could I watch their cat while they went away for a long weekend? Could Cassandra use my address for a package delivery, since they weren't sure they'd be home? Each request was reasonable, wrapped in appreciation and promises to return the favor. But the requests became more frequent, more significant. They needed to use my garage while their driveway was being repaved. Could they store some furniture in my basement while they decided what to do with Cassandra's grandmother's antiques? Would I mind if they had a few packages delivered here since their apartment mailroom wasn't secure? I said yes to everything because I loved my son and wanted to help. Because saying no felt petty when they were asking for such small things. Because I had space they needed, and what good was space if it couldn't be shared with family? I didn't realize I was being groomed. The truth, which I wouldn't piece together until months later, was that Marcus and Cassandra were drowning in debt. The fancy wedding, the expensive honeymoon, the BMW, the upscale apartment, the designer clothes, the constant dining out, it had all been funded by credit cards and loans they couldn't actually afford. Marcus's bank salary was decent but not extravagant. Cassandra's part-time job at her friend's boutique was more social activity than income source. They'd been living a lifestyle that required Harold's safety net, and when Harold's furniture stores started struggling in the economic downturn, that safety net developed holes. Big ones. But I didn't know any of this on that December afternoon when Cassandra announced her parents were moving in. All I knew was that my quiet, organized life was about to be invaded by people who'd never asked my permission. "It's only temporary," Cassandra said, stepping aside so the movers could bring in a massive leather recliner that wouldn't fit through my front door without tilting it at an alarming angle. 3 months at most. Their contractor promised the condo would be finished by March. Harold appeared beside her, already assessing my living room like a general surveying a battlefield. Nice place, Minnie. Good bones. Could use some updating, but good bones. I stood there in my own foyer, still wearing my Christmas apron, watching strangers rearrange my furniture to make room for theirs. Marcus hung back by the door, hands still in his pockets, looking like he wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. "Marcus," I said quietly, "can I speak with you privately?" He followed me into the kitchen, leaving Cassandra to direct the furniture placement with the enthusiasm of a Hollywood director. Through the doorway, I could see Harold testing the stability of my coffee table while Dolores examined my family photos with the kind of critical attention usually reserved for fine art authentication. "Mom, I know this is sudden," Marcus began, but I held up my hand. "Sudden would be calling me this morning. This is ambush." He winced. "Cassandra's parents really are having work done on their place. The contractor found some structural issues, and it's going to take longer than they thought. And they couldn't stay in a hotel? Or with Cassandra's sister? Or rent a temporary apartment?" Marcus shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. "It's complicated. They thought this would be easier for everyone." Easier for everyone except me, apparently. But I didn't say that because I could see the stress in my son's face, the way his shoulders hunched forward like he was bracing for impact. Whatever was happening here, Marcus was carrying more weight than he was letting on. From the living room came the sound of my grandmother's china cabinet being moved, followed by Cassandra's voice directing the placement of what sounded like a very large television. I closed my eyes and counted to 10 the way I used to when little Timothy Patterson would have a meltdown during story time. "How long, really?" I asked. 3 months. Maybe 4. "I promise, Mom, we'll help with everything. Groceries, utilities, whatever you need." That should have been my first clue. When people promise to help with expenses before you've even agreed to the arrangement, it usually means they can't actually help with expenses. But I nodded because he was my son, because family helps family, because I'd been raised to believe that opening your home to people in need was simply what decent people did. I nodded because I loved Marcus and trusted that he wouldn't put me in an impossible situation. I was wrong about that last part. By evening, my house had been transformed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Harold's massive desk now dominated my dining room, complete with 2 computer monitors and a printer that hummed constantly. Dolores had claimed the guest bedroom and bathroom, spreading her cosmetics across every available surface like she was setting up a department store counter. Their clothes filled my guest closet and spilled into the hallway linen closet. The living room now housed a television roughly the size of my kitchen wall, surrounded by Harold's collection of remote controls and what appeared to be every electronic device ever invented. My careful arrangement of furniture, positioned to encourage conversation and accommodate my arthritis-friendly reading chair, had been pushed aside to create what Harold called a proper entertainment center. Cassandra had taken it upon herself to organize my kitchen, moving my everyday dishes to higher shelves to make room for her parents' better plates. My coffee maker, which had served me faithfully for 12 years, was relegated to the basement because Dolores required a specific European brand that took up half my counter space. "Don't worry," Cassandra assured me as she rearranged my spice rack according to some logic I couldn't follow. "Mom and Dad are very easy house guests. They mostly keep to themselves." This turned out to be spectacularly untrue. Harold, I discovered, was an early riser who believed everyone else should be too. At 6:30 the next morning, I was awakened by the sound of the new coffee machine grinding beans with the enthusiasm of a wood chipper. This was followed by the television news at a volume that suggested Harold's hearing wasn't what it used to be, which was followed by phone calls to his business associates, in voices that carried through my bedroom wall like he was addressing a stadium. By 7, he'd moved his morning routine to my back porch, where he conducted what sounded like heated negotiations with contractors, suppliers, and employees. His voice drifted through my bedroom window, peppered with complaints about lazy workers, unreasonable customers, and the general decline of American work ethic. Dolores, meanwhile, had discovered my kitchen table and claimed it as her personal craft station. When I came downstairs for my own quiet coffee, I found her surrounded by fabric samples, measuring tapes, and what appeared to be plans for redecorating someone's entire house. She looked up from her work with the bright smile of someone who'd found the perfect solution to everyone's problems. "Good morning, Minnie. I hope you don't mind, but I'm helping the Hendersons with their kitchen renovation. I have such a good eye for design, and they just don't know where to start." My kitchen table, which had been Frank's and my place for morning coffee and evening conversations for 30 years, was now completely unusable. Every surface was covered with Dolores's projects, and she'd spread out like someone planning to stay indefinitely. "Of course," I said, pouring my coffee and retreating to the living room, where Harold was now conducting a video conference call while morning show hosts chatted cheerfully in the background. This was day 1. By day 3, I'd lost access to my dining room, my kitchen table, and my living room television during Harold's business hours, which apparently ran from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. Dolores had expanded her craft operation to include the kitchen counter, where she was now cutting fabric for what she called a will project that involved enough material to upholster a small hotel. My routines, carefully constructed over 5 years of widowhood, crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. I couldn't read in the living room because Harold needed absolute quiet for his calls. I couldn't use the kitchen table for puzzles because Dolores had claimed it for her design work. I couldn't watch my evening programs because Harold controlled the remote and preferred news channels that specialized in shouting. Even my bedroom wasn't safe. Dolores had taken to using the guest bathroom for what she called her beauty routine, which involved enough products to stock a small pharmacy and took up the better part of 2 hours every morning. Since the guest bathroom was directly below my bedroom, I was treated to the sound of hair dryers, curling irons, and what sounded like a small construction project every morning starting at 7. But the worst part wasn't the noise or the lost space, or even the complete disruption of my life. The worst part was the way they settled into my house like they'd always belonged there, like I was the guest who should be grateful for their company. Harold would emerge from his makeshift office in my dining room and comment on my housekeeping. "Minnie, you might want to dust these baseboards more often. Shows the dirt, you know." He'd inspect my mail, offer unsolicited advice about my utility bills, and suggest improvements I could make to increase my property value. Dolores would rearrange my kitchen implements according to her own logic, then act surprised when I couldn't find my own potato peeler. She'd comment on my grocery choices, suggesting I switch to organic produce or buy in bulk to save money. She'd offer to take me shopping for better clothes, as if my comfortable retirement wardrobe was somehow insufficient for my own life. They treated me like a sweet but slightly incompetent, elderly relative, who needed their guidance to function properly. They were gracious about it, always smiling, always grateful, always sure they were helping me become a better version of myself. Marcus came by every few days, bringing takeout dinners and what he probably thought were casual check-ins. But I could see the relief in his face when he found his in-laws comfortably settled, his mother apparently adjusting well to the new arrangement. He'd ask how everyone was getting along, and Harold and Dolores would beam while recounting all the ways they were helping me organize my life. "Your mother is just wonderful," Dolores would tell him, "so accommodating. We're having such a good time getting to know each other better." And Marcus would smile and nod, believing that his decision to allow this invasion had been the right one, that everyone was happy with the arrangement. He couldn't see that I was disappearing in my own home, becoming a supporting character in someone else's story. I didn't complain, because I'd been raised not to make waves, because family was supposed to help family, because Marcus looked so stressed about whatever was weighing on him that I didn't want to add to his burden. I smiled and nodded and made the best of it because that's what good mothers do. But inside, something was building. A quiet anger that grew stronger every morning, when I couldn't drink my coffee at my own kitchen table, every evening when I couldn't watch my programs on my own television, every time Harold offered advice about my own house or Dolores rearranged my own belongings. 3 months, I told myself. I could survive anything for 3 months. What I didn't know was that 3 months was never the real timeline. What I didn't know was that Harold and Dolores weren't renovating their condo at all. They'd lost it to foreclosure 2 months earlier and were desperately trying to keep up appearances while they figured out their next move. What I didn't know was that Marcus and Cassandra were 3 payments behind on their rent and facing eviction themselves, that the BMW was about to be repossessed, that they'd borrowed money from Harold that he didn't actually have, creating a cascade of financial disasters that would eventually crash into my peaceful retirement like a freight train. What I didn't know was that I wasn't helping family through a temporary inconvenience. I was being used as a free solution to other people's bad decisions, a safety net they'd cut out from under me without asking if I was strong enough to hold their weight. But I would learn all of this soon enough. And when I did, I would discover something about myself that I'd forgotten. During all those years of being accommodating, all those decades of putting other people's comfort before my own needs, I would remember that the woman who'd managed a classroom full of challenging children for 43 years, who'd balanced budgets and navigated school politics and stood up to difficult parents and demanding administrators, was still in there somewhere under all that politeness. And she was getting very, very tired of being taken for granted. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 6 weeks after the moving truck had pulled into my driveway. I was trying to make breakfast in my own kitchen while working around Dolores's craft supplies, Harold's coffee empire, and a stack of boxes labeled important papers that had somehow migrated from the basement to my counter space. Ethel had called the night before, worried because she hadn't seen me in weeks. "You missed bridge again," she'd said. "Joan thinks maybe you're avoiding us." I'd had to admit that I was embarrassed to invite anyone over. My house, which had always been neat and welcoming, now looked like a storage unit had exploded in it. Every surface was covered with other people's belongings. Every room had been repurposed for someone else's convenience. "Why don't you come over here for coffee tomorrow?" Ethel had suggested. "We need to catch up." So that Tuesday morning, I was attempting to make a coffee cake to bring to Ethel's, working around Harold's breakfast meeting and Dolores's morning craft session. I'd finally found my mixing bowls behind Harold's protein powder collection and was measuring flour when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Janet Mitchell, a woman I'd worked with at the school district office during my last 5 years of teaching. She'd moved to Florida after retirement, and we exchanged Christmas cards but rarely talked. "Minnie, honey, I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue like this. I'm up visiting my daughter in Philadelphia, and I drove through Millbrook yesterday. I couldn't help but notice there's a for rent sign on Harold Walsh's building downtown." My hands stilled on the mixing bowl. "I'm sorry, what?" "The furniture store. Walsh's Fine Furniture. It's got a big space available for lease sign in the window." I thought that was odd since I know Harold's Cassandra's father. "And didn't you tell me in your Christmas card that she'd married Marcus?" The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet. "Janet, are you sure? Maybe it's just one of his stores, not the main one." "Oh no, honey. This was definitely the main store. The big one on Market Street. The whole building's empty. Looks like it's been closed for a while." I thanked Janet and hung up, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. From the dining room came the sound of Harold's voice, cheerfully discussing delivery schedules with someone. From the kitchen table, Dolores hummed while cutting fabric for her latest project. They'd been living in my house for 6 weeks, claiming their condo was being renovated, while Harold's business had apparently collapsed entirely. I walked very quietly upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door. Then I called the Millbrook Township office and asked to speak to someone about property records. 20 minutes later, I knew the truth. Harold and Dolores Walsh had lost their condo to foreclosure in November. Walsh's Fine Furniture had closed permanently in October, with creditors seizing the inventory and equipment. The family had been living in their car for 2 weeks before Cassandra convinced Marcus to let them move in with me. But they hadn't told Marcus the whole truth either. He thought his in-laws were temporarily displaced by renovation work, not permanently homeless due to financial ruin. I sat on my bed, surrounded by the boxes and bags that had been displaced from the guest room, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something more precise than that. I'd been lied to, not just by Harold and Dolores, but by my own son. Even if he didn't know the full extent of their situation, he'd known enough to realize this wasn't a simple favor between family members. He'd known I was being manipulated, and he'd allowed it to happen because it solved his problem. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt completely clear about what needed to happen next. I called my attorney. Robert Chen had handled Frank's estate and had been patiently managing my small legal needs for 5 years. He was the kind of lawyer who explained things in plain English and never made me feel foolish for asking questions. "Minnie," he said when his secretary put me through. "How are you? Everything okay?" "Robert, I need to understand my rights regarding house guests who won't leave." There was a pause. "Are we talking about a tenant situation or family members?" "Family members who lied about why they needed to stay here and who have no intention of leaving." "Ah." Another pause. "How long have they been there?" 6 weeks. They claimed it would be 3 months maximum. "And what's the real situation?" I told him everything. Harold's business failure, the foreclosure, the lies about renovation, the complete takeover of my house. Robert listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds that I interpreted as either sympathy or professional concern. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Minnie, you're in what we call a guest versus tenant situation. Since they're not paying rent, and there's no formal agreement, they're legally guests. But guests who've been there more than 30 days can claim certain rights, especially if they can prove they've been contributing to household expenses." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means you can't just change the locks tomorrow. You'll need to give them formal notice to leave, usually 30 days. And if they refuse, you'll have to go through the eviction process." "Eviction? For my own family?" "I'm afraid so. The law doesn't distinguish between family and strangers once someone establishes residency in your home." I felt the walls of my own house closing in around me. "Robert, they've completely taken over my home. I can't use my own kitchen table, I can't watch my own television, I can't have friends over because there's no space. And now you're telling me I have to live like this for at least another month?" "Not necessarily. There might be other options, depending on how creative we want to get." "What kind of options?" "Well, if they've been fraudulent about their circumstances, if they've caused damage to your property, if they violated any local ordinances, there might be faster ways to resolve this." I thought about Harold's constant business calls at all hours, the way he'd moved my furniture without permission, Dolores's craft supplies taking over every surface. What kind of ordinances? Home business operations, for one. If Harold's running a business out of your dining room without proper permits, that could be an issue. Zoning violations, noise complaints, unauthorized modifications to the property. Something sparked in my chest. Not revenge, exactly, but recognition. The same feeling I used to get when a particularly challenging student finally pushed too far and I had to shift from patient teacher to firm authority figure. "Robert, I need you to do something for me. I need a complete background check on Harold and Dolores Walsh, financial records, legal troubles, anything public. And I need to know exactly what my options are for getting them out of my house immediately." "Minnie, are you sure you want to go that route? Legal action against family members can get messy very quickly." I looked around my bedroom, which no longer felt like my sanctuary but like a refugee camp in my own home. "Robert, they've already made it messy. I'm just trying to clean it up." "All right, give me 48 hours. And Minnie, document everything. Take photos of what they've done to your house. Keep records of any conversations about money or timelines. Save any text messages. If this goes legal, you'll want evidence." I hung up and sat very still for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of other people living in my house. Harold's voice carrying through the floor as he argued with someone about a delivery. Dolores moving around in the kitchen, probably reorganizing something else to suit her preferences. Then I got up and walked downstairs to find Harold sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by papers and speaking loudly into his phone. "Excuse me," I said quietly. He held up one finger, indicating I should wait while he finished his conversation. In my own dining room, where he'd set up an office without asking permission. I waited exactly 10 seconds, then walked over and gently but firmly pressed the button to end his call. Harold stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Minnie, I was in the middle of an important business call." "And I'm in the middle of my own house," I said calmly. "Harold, we need to talk." For the first time since he'd moved in, Harold looked uncertain. Something in my voice, perhaps, or the way I was standing. After 43 years of managing difficult people, I knew how to project authority when I needed to. "Of course," he said, gathering his papers nervously. "What can I do for you?" "You can start by telling me the truth about why you're really here." The color drained from his face so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, Walsh's Fine Furniture closed permanently in October. I mean, you lost your condo to foreclosure in November. I mean, there is no renovation, no temporary displacement, and no plan for you to leave my house in the foreseeable future." Harold's papers scattered as his hands began to shake. "Minnie, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, I want you to go get Dolores and Marcus, because we're going to have a family meeting, and everyone is going to tell the truth for once." Harold opened his mouth to argue, then looked at my face and apparently thought better of it. Within 10 minutes, we were all gathered in my living room. Dolores perched nervously on the edge of the couch she'd chosen for Harold's entertainment center. Marcus slumped in Frank's old recliner, looking like he wanted to disappear. Harold stood by the window, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. I remained standing, positioned where I could see all of them clearly. It was a technique I'd learned in the classroom. Never sit down when you need to maintain authority. "Now," I said in the same tone I'd once used to quiet a room full of restless 8-year-olds. "Someone is going to tell me exactly what's been happening here, the truth this time." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Mom, I should have told you everything from the beginning." "Yes, you should have, but you can tell me now." And slowly, piece by piece, the whole story came out. Harold's furniture business had been struggling for years, but he'd hidden the problems by borrowing against their condo and his other properties. When the economy tightened, customers stopped buying expensive furniture, and Harold couldn't keep up with his payments. The bank had foreclosed on everything: the stores, the condo, even his personal vehicles. Cassandra had been in denial about her parents' financial collapse, convinced that Harold would find a way to fix everything like he always had. When that didn't happen, she'd panicked. She couldn't let her friends know her family had lost everything, couldn't face the shame of her parents being homeless, so she'd convinced Marcus to let them stay with me temporarily, while she figured out a permanent solution. But there was no permanent solution, because there was no money left to create one. Marcus had known something was wrong, but hadn't pushed for details because he was dealing with his own financial crisis. He and Cassandra were drowning in credit card debt, behind on their rent, and facing their own potential eviction. He'd been too overwhelmed to ask hard questions about his in-laws' situation. "We thought maybe if we all lived here for a while, we could save up enough money to get back on our feet," Marcus said miserably. "I know it's not fair to you, but we didn't know what else to do." I stood there listening to my son explain how he'd planned to use me as a free housing solution for 4 adults in financial crisis, and I felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard clarity. "So let me understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You've all been lying to me for 6 weeks. You've moved into my house under false pretenses. You've completely disrupted my life, taken over my space, and made me a stranger in my own home. And your plan was to continue this indefinitely while you get back on your feet, using my resources." "Mom, we'll pay you back," Marcus said desperately. "As soon as things turn around, we'll make this right." "With what money, Marcus? Harold just told us he's lost everything. You just told us you're behind on your own rent. Cassandra works part-time at a boutique. What exactly are you planning to pay me back with?" "We'll figure it out. We'll get second jobs, we'll sell things, You'll continue to live in my house while you figure it out." Marcus fell silent. I looked around the room at these 4 adults who had decided that my retirement, my peace, my home, were acceptable casualties in their financial war. People I loved, people I'd helped and supported and welcomed into my life, who had repaid that kindness by treating me like a resource to be consumed. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. "You have 72 hours to remove yourselves and all of your belongings from my house." "Mom, please," Marcus started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished."